It's 9-2 a blue-red twin. Todd Stevens currently number 18 on our leaderboard with Naya Company. He's also at 9-2, and he is probably dressed better than the two of us combined.
Yeah, I mean, Todd Stevens, he looks sharp. And I mean, he takes these games and this tournament really seriously. I know last year he really wanted to make it into the Players' Championship, and he kind of got a late start on the year, but he really made up for lost ground, and he got pretty far up the leaderboard. And I think for this upcoming year, he's going to be one of the people to watch as someone who's really gunning for that Player Championship really hard.
So it looks like Todd Stevens is led on a Shockland tapped and then played another Shockland and a Noble Hierarch. Kevin Jones just with a Scalding Tarn. He's going to fetch out a Steam Vents, Lightning Bolt, that Noble Hierarch, Bolt and the Bird. Then he's going to take his second turn here, and let's see what he can cobble together.
Yeah, and so far I would say this is basically going the way Kevin Jones wants. Kevin really wants the board to be clear, particularly on the opening turns, and Todd Stevens really wants to get some pressure on the board as fast as possible.
So Kevin just is going to play an Island and Pass. Todd has a Forest and a Loxodon Smiter, which is very good to play into open mana from the blue-red twin deck since it can't be remanded. Todd's going to gain a lot of tempo by putting that 4/4 on the battlefield.
Yeah, I would even say Loxodon Smiter is probably just one of the better cards to fight Blue-Red Twin in terms of developing board pressure, simply because the 4 toughness means that it can't be bolted. Look at him just throw his card all over the Deceiver XR.
Right on top.
Like taunting him to block it.
Would you like to block?
Yeah.
My guess was no. Kevin Jones is going to take 4 damage. On his turn, he was able to Deceiver Exarch, untap a land, and cast his Serum Vision, so he's definitely developing himself. Now, Todd Stevens here, he basically has to hope that he has a Path to Exile in his hand to protect him from a potential combo turn from Kevin Jones if he decides to go for it. I can't imagine that he will. He might wait for a better spot for once he has to spell backup, but it is always something that people have to keep in mind.
Yeah, Kevin has played these blue-red tempo-y decks for basically as long as I can remember. I mean, I've always seen him play a Jeskai deck in Standard, and he's been playing Blue-Red Twin for almost as long as I can remember also. I think he's probably going to assess the situation that even though he may be able to go for the combo, and it's unlikely that Todd Stevens has a Path to Exile, the risk is probably too great, and Kevin Jones still has a little bit of life to work with and kind of, you know, take his time, maybe wait for a better spot to lay down the combo with Dispel backup.
Yeah, now this Tarmogoyf is a 4/5, which means it's going to be able to attack through that Deceiver Exarch. Now Kevin Jones is going to miss his 4th land drop and just pass the turn back to Todd Stevens. It looks like he's just going to start crashing.
Yeah, and this is pretty bad for Kevin just because...
Looks like he's going to try and use a Twisted Image to make his 1/4 into a 4/1 and trade with his Loxodon Smiter. Now that is going to make it vulnerable to something like Lightning Bolt, but Todd does not have another red mana, so if Kevin wants to remand this Lightning Bolt, he might be able to get some value out of his Deceiver Exarch.
Yeah, while this looks like it's going to be fine for Kevin, it's really not doing what he wants to do. I mean, essentially what's happening here is both players are making trades, but Todd still has a board presence, and Todd is still pushing damage. With Kevin missing land drops and now losing its Deceiver Exarch, he really needs to start, you know, from 0, building up his board. He's, you know, missing land drops, and I think this is not exactly where Kevin wants to be, but hopefully he can dig himself out.
And now the good news for Kevin is that Todd also didn't have a 4th land and didn't deploy another creature. It looks like Kevin has a Pestromite in hand, so he is going to be able to tap down either that Tarmogoyf or one of Todd Stevens' white sources if he wants to, depending on how this next turn happens to play out.
Yeah, it seems like both players are not quite firing on all cylinders, but considering the fact that they're equally not firing on all cylinders, we're getting a pretty balanced game, which is nice.
So it looks like Kevin is going to go ahead and go with a Harvest Pyre here to try and kill off this Tarmogoyf. Now he does have to make sure that he removes enough cards and does enough damage to actually kill the Tarmogoyf based off of what's going to be left in the graveyard once everything's all said and done.
The one thing that's nice, though, is because the Harvest Pyre is going to be exiling cards, as just from casting the Harvest Pyre, the Tarmogoyf is going to shrink because Todd it looks like he only has 2 lands in his graveyard, but there's a good chance that there may be a fetch land hiding underneath that Noble Hierarch.
Let's see here, Kevin's just going through all the math to figure out how many cards he wants to get rid of. And I think that he might just do 5 and make sure it dies.
Yeah, it's good to be sure. On the other hand, though, Kevin would like to leave some cards in his graveyard just because he has Snapcaster Mage in his deck.
So Todd's just going to go ahead and play a Knight of the Reliquary here and pass back to Kevin. Now that Knight is only a 2/2, so it can die to a Lightning Bolt if Kevin happens to draw into one. So there is his 4th land, which is real big, since he does already have Pestermite in his hand, and it's a Desolate Lighthouse, so he gets to loot away to try and find cards to finish this game out.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about these sequences is if Todd still had that Tarmogoyf on the board, he probably wouldn't have tapped out for the Knight of the Reliquary, because the Tarmogoyf is a pretty good clock, and Todd is likely going to want to keep his mana open for fear of the combo. But now in this situation, the Tarmogoyf died, Todd just taps out, plays another threat, and now he can keep his mana open while he has pressure on the board.
Looks like Kevin's going to use a Deceiver Exarch to tap down that Knight of the Reliquary. He does know that Todd has a Lightning Bolt, so the Pestermite that's in his hand isn't really as good as we would like it to be, but this Deceiver is a great card.
Yeah, this looks like I believe it's happening at the beginning of combat, although I'm not 100% sure about that. It may also be end of turn. But it looks like what Todd's going to be doing is he's setting up a situation where he can cast Collected Company and still have a mana open for his Path to Exile. So he's going to be able to get, an extra mana off that Knight of the Reliquary, develop his board some more, but still keep himself safe against the Splinter Twin.
So it's like he has used his Windswept Heath to fetch basic forest. He's also using his Knight of the Reliquary to sacrifice a forest and find a Horizon Canopy in response to the tap effect from the Deceiver Exarch. So let's see what he decides to do with the rest of his turn.
Yeah, I think ideally Todd would fire off a Collected Company and keep a white open. But if he doesn't have a Path to Exile, he may just use the Horizon Canopy to draw a card.
Looks like he does have a Path to Exile in his hand.
Perfect.
So he has a Path and a Lightning Bolt. And I believe a Collected Company. Let's see what he decides to do here. It is going to be Collected Company. So this is going to greatly increase his board presence if he doesn't whiff.
And it looks like Kevin has the Dispel, which is kind of good news for Todd, because Todd is... Basically, that means there's a better chance that if Kevin goes for the combo, Todd is going to be able to successfully Path to Exile his creature. And that's really all Todd wants to do. He just wants to trade, and Todd wants to be trading while he has pressure on the board, which is essentially what's going on now.
Yeah, now it looks like Kevin does have a Vendilion Clique in his hand, so he could Vendilion Clique Todd Stevens, see what he's got going on, get rid of that Path to Exile, and potentially set something up where he can combo off. But that Knight of the Reliquary now is a 4/4 and could potentially get bigger and make life pretty tough for Kevin.
Yeah, the 4 toughness is a really, really big deal just because it's out of Lightning Bolt range. Also, because it's a 4/4, it can attack through the Deceiver Exarch. 4/4 is kind of the that money power and toughness that you want when you're trying to attack a blue-red twin deck.
So Kevin is going to go ahead and cast a Deceiver Exarch in Todd Stevens' draw step to see if he can snag...
Or Vendilion Clique.
Or Vendilion Clique in his draw step. We're going to get a Lightning Bolt and a Path to Exile is going to happen. He's going to see an Arid Mesa.
And again, this is all Todd wants to do. Keep trading while Todd has pressure on the board. Now Todd is going to be able to get a decent-sized attack step. Todd is going to be able to play that land, crack it.
And draw a card off his Horizon Canopy.
Right, and then, basically Todd, with this one creature, has Kevin on a 2-turn clock.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be able to make it grow to a 6/6. Which is very large. So we've used the Horizon Canopy. He's going to crash in with the Knight, cash in his Arid Mesa to fetch out another land. And it looks like he's going to take 6 damage from this Knight of the Reliquary and go down to 3. Now, Kevin does have Pestermite, Splinter Twin in his hand, and Todd drew a Tarmogoyf off of his Horizon Canopy. So if Todd bricks this next turn, he actually just loses this game because Kevin can tap down the Knight and then untap into his combo.
Yeah, really showing why this blue-red twin deck is so good, because it can come so close to losing and then out of nowhere win. Now on Todd's side, he has the potential to draw a couple things to break up the twin combo, but he can also just draw a Lightning Bolt to win the game on the spot.
And it looks like he drew a Path to Exile.
Wow, really great draw for Todd. So Kevin, though, can still draw a Dispel to protect his combo, so we'll see how this goes.
Challenge competitors, your pairings are now up.
Man, that path is a very timely draw for Todd Stevens.
Yeah, really, really great. And I mean, Todd actually has not a ton of disruption, but he has a couple really efficient pieces for this matchup. So I think everyone knows that Blue-Red Twin is such a popular deck, and Todd seems to have come well prepared to give himself good opportunities to draw the things that he needs in this matchup.
So it looks like Kevin Jones has used his Deceiver Exarch to tap down this Knight of the Reliquary in Todd's combat step. He's deciding what he wants to do with it, activate it or not. Oh, it looks like it's a Loxodon Smiter that Todd had drawn and not a Tarmogoyf. So it looks like he might just cash in this Path Exile now.
Which isn't a bad idea. I mean, if you wait, you give Kevin the potential to draw a Dispel. And if Kevin has a Remand, then you're just going to be able to cast it again anyway. Yep. So this is a really good play on Todd's part. I like it a lot.
I definitely agree. And I have to imagine that we're going to see a Loxodon Smiter come down here after he activates this Knight of the Reliquary.
And if Todd has 2 lethal threats, that's going to be a lot harder for Kevin to deal with. And now with the addition
like he's going to have 3 lethal threats.
Yeah, and now with that Stirring Wildwood, things are looking really good for Todd to sort of wrap up this game on the following turn. I think Kevin's going to be really looking for something like a Cryptic Command, and may even need to chain a Cryptic Command into a Snapcaster Mage in order to stay alive.
What a turn of events. Kevin was almost dead, and then was going to kill Todd if Todd didn't draw one of his handful of cards to interact. He did, and now he's just going to be able to take this game back. Yeah,
this deck has definitely swung back and forth with the various top decks that each player has had, and it's led to a pretty exciting match. I mean, really highlighting some of the excitement of Magic, where because it's a deck game, you draw your card, and it could be great, it could win you the game, or it could lose you a game, and that's a lot of the excitement of playing Magic.
Looks like Kevin Jones drew the Cryptic Command, so he might be able to piece a Deceiver Exarch together here. He can untap his land and then use his Cryptic Command, but Todd Stevens drew a Lightning Bolt.
Yeah.
So we just had a bunch of great draws back and forth for all of these players.
Jeez.
And the game's just going to be done. So Kevin, fighting tooth and nail to give himself a chance to win, was able to set it up 2 turns in a row with some crafty play. Just didn't matter. Todd Stevens had the 1-mana spells right off the top of his deck when he needed them.
And one of the big stories...
In the right order.
Yeah. And one of the big stories of that game was, if you looked at that game, Todd Stevens, he ended the game with no cards in hand. He used the last card in his hand to deal the last points of damage. Whereas Kevin Jones, on the other hand, he still had a lot of cards in hand. If that game had gone longer and Kevin would have had time to cast all of his cards, there's a good chance that Kevin would have been able to win. But Todd Stevens' cards being so cheap and so efficient, he was able to make the game about tempo, and he was able to leverage essentially his storm count over the course of those, 6 turns of that game.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboards here for the 2 players and see if we can figure out what the plan's going to be. For Todd Stevens, he has a Rending Volley, 2 copies of Dami Raid, a Stony Silence, 2 Spellskites, an Elspeth Knight Errant, 2 Kitchen Finks, an Ancient Grudge, 2 Engineered Explosives, a Grim Lavamancer, and 2 Blood Moons. So what do we think is going to go on here?
So I think there's 3 specific cards that are essentially tailor-made for Fighting Twin, and they are the Rending Volley, because it's an uncounterable way that can kill Deceiver Exarch or Pestermite, and also Spellskite, because when they try to cast their twin, you can just have it target the Spellskite. The other cards that I think are also going to be quite good are Engineer Explosives. I think that's a really good one. And you can consider Kitchen Finks depending on how controlling you think the twin deck will be. I don't think the twin deck is really equipped to actually fully control Todd Stevens, so I think Kevin is going to keep in a lot of his combo pieces. So I don't think that Todd will bring in Kitchen Finks, but there's an argument can be made for it.
Yeah, I could see all of those happening. As for Kevin Jones, we've got 2 Anger of the Gods, 2 Blood Moon, 2 Jace, Architect of Thought, 2 Vandal Blast, 1 Kuranos, God of Storms, 1 Pia and Kira Nalar, an Izzet Staticaster and a Gate, a Roast, a Rending Volley, and a copy of Spellskite. So what do you think Kevin Jones is going to do here?
So I think because Todd has Voice of Resurgences, that there's a good chance that the Anger of the Gods come in. I think also Rending Volley is one of Kevin's better ways to deal with an early Knight of the Reliquary or a Loxodon Spider. I think Roast is also a good card because it's one of the few things that can kill a Tarmogoyf for the other cards that I just mentioned. If Kevin wants to really go on that control route, he can also bring in his 2 Jace, his Kuranos, the P and Kiran Nalar. All of these cards can be good options. The other card that sometimes you'll see people bring in is Blood Moon, but you really got to have a good read on your opponent. I don't think Kevin will bring in Blood Moon, but when he's on the play, it's something you may see him, kind of toy with.
Yeah, I could see all of those. There are a lot of 2s and 1-ofs that you'll find in these modern sideboards. And a lot of those cards are pretty techy. And if you want to get the latest hot tech for whatever format you're playing, you can check out the StarCityGames.com newsletter. That is your source for Magic the Gathering news.
Yeah, I mean, this last week we saw an article in the newsletter featured that was written by Jerry Thompson, where he showed a really exciting Grixis deck that had Goryo's Vengeance. That was really sweet. I was really hoping you would play that this weekend, but he didn't. And then also, if you just want to get ahead on spoilers and potential decks, Patrick Chapin also read an article that was featured in the newsletter featuring a bunch of brews, and there's no better place to get a deck list than from the innovator, Patrick Chapin.
Absolutely. So again, your source for Magic the Gathering news. Get the latest on the SCG Tour. Watch the SCG Tour Match of the Week. Receive exclusive deck lists and advice. Catch up on all event results. Read an exclusive Cardboard Crack comic, which this week was particularly funny.
Yeah.
And you can sign up absolutely for free. go.starcitygames.com/newsletter. So we're coming back here. Both players are just about finished shuffling. Kevin Jones at 9-2 on Blue-Red Twin was able to play in back-to-back Players' Championships the first 2 years. I imagine he's going to try and make it back for the third year, traveling around to the Opens. Todd Stevens currently in 18th place on our leaderboard on Naya Company, who is 9-2.
Yeah, so one thing that'll be interesting about this is I feel like there's a better chance. Ooh, Kevin.
So let's take a look at Kevin Jones's profile here really quick. He is 28 from Kingston, New York. He does have 8 open top 8s with 1 win. He won the Eternal Weekend Legacy Championship with Blue-Red Delver. He did play college tennis at Pace University as a walk-on after teaching himself the game against a brick handball wall at the age of 10. And he enjoys reading. He reads at least one mystery or suspense novel every week, which is pretty interesting. You do like to read as well.
Yeah, I do. I kind of picked it up this past year, and it's really, really nice. I particularly like his stat of 8 open top 8s and 1 win. You know who also has 8 open top 8s and 1 win?
Who's that?
Me.
Oh, Andrew Boswell.
Yeah, I have the same stats as Kevin Jones. That's pretty sweet.
I mean, I think you're a little better than Kevin, though.
Oh, I mean, I'm just a humble commentator now.
So it looks like we're just about ready here. Todd Stevens does have his opening hand. I believe Kevin might be mulliganing. So that's why he has... So Kevin is down to 6.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to mention right before Kevin's slide came up was one thing that's interesting about these Blue-Red Twin decks is the flexibility. Kevin can really go a lot more controlling or stay really focused on the combo. I think an argument can certainly be made for both sides, but I think it's more likely that Kevin will be on the combo plan when he's on the play and a little bit more likely that he's on the control plan when he's on the draw.
So these first couple turns are going to go lightning quick as these players are very familiar with their decks. Kevin just with land go for a couple turns with an island and a Desolate Lighthouse. Todd Stevens is going to fetch out his Sacred Foundry on Kevin's end step so we can avoid taking some damage to put it on the battlefield tapped. And it looks like we might see a Voice of Resurgence come here from Todd Stevens.
Yeah, Todd really needs to develop some sort of pressure. He doesn't want his Voice of Resurgence to get hit by something like a Spell Snare, but is certainly one of the best ways to lead his pressure, even though it's not a lot of damage. It just makes it a lot harder for Kevin to have the right answers for the right situation.
And it looks like Kevin does have a Spell Snare for that Voice of Resurgence. Todd's going to go ahead and fetch out with his Windswept Heath of Forest.
And that's certainly a calculated risk on Todd's part. He really doesn't want his Voice of Resurgence to get tagged by a Spell Snare, but these Blue-Red Twin decks, they don't actually play that many Spell Snares, and so it's, in Todd's favor to just sort of run it out there and assume it's going to resolve more often than it doesn't.
Yeah, they usually only have 1 or 2. But Kevin is going to miss his 3rd land drop. He's going to pass it back to Todd, who's just going to play another Voice of Resurgence, which is going to resolve, lay an Arid Mesa, and pass. So it looks like Kevin might have drawn a land. Nope, he's just going to Snapcaster Mage and then pass the turn back. So it looks like we do have an Ambush Viper on defense duty here for Kevin Jones.
Yeah, this is not good for Kevin. The Voice of Resurgence is one of the harder threats for him to deal with, simply because Burn isn't particularly good against the Voice of Resurgence because it'll just create a token, and now his counter spells aren't going to be particularly good either. So Kevin's really strapped in this situation, is just running out that Snapcaster Mage because there's a good chance he dies without casting all the cards in his hand, so he just needs to start casting them, even if they're not for as much value as he would prefer.
So it looks like Todd Stevens is going to fetch out a Shock Land, Lightning Bolt that Snapcaster Mage on Kevin's end step. She's just going to play a tapped Stomping Grounds and get in for 2 with his Voice of Resurgence. Kevin's just going to play a Snapcaster Mage to be on defense again, and this Dromoka's command is going to put quite the hurt on Kevin. Not only is it going to get rid of that Snapcaster Mage, it's now going to make that Voice of Resurgence a 3/3, which is greatly going to increase its clock.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between a 2/2 and a 3/3 is actually a pretty big difference. The one thing that's a little bit of a silver lining for Kevin Jones, though, is that he's not getting beaten down by a bunch of creatures at once. It's just a 3/3 right now. So Kevin, even though he's missed his land drops, he's got a little bit of time. He can still cobble something together. I mean, the twin deck is very, very good at winning out of nowhere, even when it is quite far behind against these other creature decks. And if Todd ends up using all of his removal on, you know, kind of incidental things, Kevin might be able to have the last threat standing in Splitter Twin.
So it looks like Kevin was able to find the land. However, it was a Scalding Tarn, and he used it to get a Steam Vents, so he did take 3 damage to get that land. He went and played ahead his Deceiver Exarch to untap a land to try and cast another spell this turn. But Todd Stevens did have a Rending Valley for that Deceiver Exarch. Now Kevin is going to use a Lightning Bolt here on that Voice of Resurgence. It will create an Evan Irwin Elemental token here. It's currently only a 1/1, but Todd Stevens just drew the perfect card to grow it in size, Collected Company.
Yeah, this is a really good draw for Todd because right now his Voice of Resurgence token is only a 1/1, and without a significant form of pressure, Kevin can make use of that time in a much better ways than Todd can. So Todd really, really needs to have a good offense, and this Collected Company is the best way for him to get that.
So it looks like we've got a Spellskite and a Knight of the Reliquary.
Brutal.
2 fine cards.
Yeah.
That's going to put a big clock on Kevin Jones, protect Todd Stevens from the combo, get in 3 damage with that Elemental token, and things are just coming up Millhouse for Todd Stevens.
Yeah, I mean, those were 2 of the best cards for Todd to get. Knight of the Reliquary is Todd's biggest creature, and Spellskite is probably his best way of disrupting Kevin Jones. So what's great about that Collected Company is not only did it play offense, it also played defense.
So Kevin Jones was able to find a 4th land with his Sulphur Falls. He does have a Cryptic Command in his hand, which might be able to buy him some time. But Todd is going to play a pre-combat Voice of Resurgence here to try and grow his Elemental token. And then I think this is going to force Kevin's hand on that Cryptic Command, and he might even have to Fog.
Yeah, this is certainly not where Kevin wants to be. And I mean, Todd is really just showing how much more efficient his cards are.
So it looks like he's going to counter the Voice of Resurgence and bounce the Knight of the Reliquary. And Todd Stevens is going to go ahead.
So it looks like he's just trying to make
tap the creatures. Okay, so he's going to counter and bounce and tap the creatures. Todd's going to go ahead and use his Knight of the Reliquary just to get a little bit of value, find a Horizon Canopy, cash it in.
And this is a good play from Kevin Jones just because it's one of the best plays to prevent damage for this turn and also keep that problematic Voice of Resurgence off the table.
Todd Stevens is going to follow up with a Loxodon Smiter, pass the game back to Kevin, who's going to draw his card for the turn, and then shake Todd Stevens' hand.
Yeah, I mean, Todd Stevens, he just had a little too much muscle. Kevin was definitely in a bad spot from the get-go just because he was missing lands. I mean, he was stuck on 2 lands and ended up just casting 2 Snapcaster Mages for really no value. So that's probably one of the more unfortunate things that can happen, but you can really see in both games, Todd Stevens, his cards are just so muscular and so efficient that he just gets onto the board in such a big way. He only needs a couple pieces of disruption to close out the game.
So you're trying to say that Todd's creatures are tall and handsome?
Oh, yeah.
They're very tall and handsome.
Yeah, Tarmogoyf is a